I've always believed that fear comes in layers. It starts small, almost laughably so, like the prickling of your skin when the light flickers in an empty hallway, or the sound of water dripping from a faucet you swear you turned off. But then it grows. It spreads like rot in the walls of your mind until it becomes something else entirely. Something that lives in your chest, waiting for the right moment to crawl out and remind you that you're never really safe. That night, I thought my fear was a cockroach, ugly and harmless. But I was wrong. My real fear was standing behind me, breathing slow and deep. And when I turned around, I met the kind of danger that didn't crawl. It prowled. It started with a scream. Mine, to be exact. Sharp, desperate, the kind of sound that even I didn't recognize as my own, because it tore out of me like a confession. The little bastard had scurried across the counter, antennae twitching like it owned the place, and before I could think, I dropped the plate I was washing. It shattered into a dozen jagged pieces that gleamed under the dull yellow light of my kitchen, the same light that made everything in my apartment look sickly, like it had been left too long in the dark. I backed away, my chest heaving, eyes locked on the creature as it darted toward the corner near the fridge. But then, just as I reached for the broom, I felt it. A presence. You know how sometimes, even before your brain catches up, your body knows? My skin went cold first, then the back of my neck prickled as if invisible fingers had brushed against it. I froze. The streetlight outside my window flickered once, casting a trembling shadow on the cracked linoleum floor. Then came a voice. Deep, smooth, calm in a way that made it worse. Are you always this loud over a bug, or are you trying to wake the whole damn neighborhood? I spun around, my heart slamming so hard against my ribs that I thought it might break free. And there he was. A stranger in my kitchen. No, not just a stranger. A man who didn't look like he belonged in my world at all. He leaned against the doorway like he had every right to be there, one hand buried in the pocket of a dark tailored coat, the other holding a cigarette that glowed faintly. A red ember in the gloom. His eyes. God, his eyes. They were dark. Not just in color, but in weight, like they carried the shadow of every sin he'd ever committed and didn't regret. I couldn't speak at first. My throat was tight. My voice lost somewhere between panic and disbelief. Who the hell are you? I finally managed, my voice shaking even though I tried to sound stronger than I felt. He didn't answer right away. He just studied me, his gaze slow and deliberate, as if he was reading something only he could see. When he finally moved, it was unhurried. He flicked the cigarette into the sink, the ember hissing out in the water. Doesn't matter who I am, he said, stepping closer, his boots heavy on the floor. What matters is that you weren't supposed to be here? Supposed to? I started, but he cut me off with a look so sharp it sliced through whatever words I thought I had. I stumbled backward until my hip hit the counter. The faint smell of smoke and cologne wrapped around me. Something dark, expensive, intoxicating. The kind of scent that lingers in your lungs long after you've left the room. He was tall, not just in the way men usually are, but in a way that made the air feel smaller. His presence filled the room like a storm fills the sky, heavy and electric. His hair was dark and slightly disheveled, a few strands falling across his forehead, and there was a scar, small, pale, just above his jawline, the kind that hinted at violence but didn't boast about it. What do you mean I wasn't supposed to be here? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He smiled then, or maybe it was something close to a smile, though it never reached his eyes. Wrong place, wrong time. Story of most people who end up in my way. I didn't understand, not yet, not really. All I knew was that there was a man in my kitchen who looked like he'd stepped out of someone else's nightmare, and he was speaking in riddles while I stood barefoot in pajama shorts clutching a broom like it was a weapon. Look, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You need to leave. I don't know what you're—" And then I heard it. The sound of boots outside, more than one pair, the sharp click of metal against the fire escape. His eyes flicked toward the window, his expression hardening, transforming in an instant from detached amusement to lethal focus. "Get down," he ordered. Before I could question him, before I could even breathe, he grabbed my arm and yanked me to the floor. A split second later, glass shattered. A gunshot tore through the window, splintering the frame where my head had just been. I screamed again, but this time it wasn't because of a cockroach. He pulled a gun from inside his coat, sleek, black, and terrifying, and fired back through the window, his movements precise, efficient, like someone who had done this 1,000 times and never missed. The noise was deafening, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. When it was over, when the silence came crashing back, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. He stood, holstered the weapon, and glanced down at me, disheveled, shaking, my breath ragged. "You saw that?" he said quietly, almost to himself. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I wished I hadn't? That I didn't know if I was more terrified of the men outside or the one standing in front of me? He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing my chin, lifting my gaze to meet his. "You shouldn't have seen that." "Then maybe you shouldn't have broken into my apartment," I snapped, the fear cracking open into something else. Anger, adrenaline, something reckless. For the first time, his expression softened, just slightly. "You've got a mouth on you," he murmured. "That's going to get you into trouble." "Too late," I said, glaring up at him. And that's when he laughed, low, dangerous, almost like a growl. It wasn't the laugh of a man amused. It was the laugh of someone who saw defiance as a challenge. He straightened, pulling a phone from his coat, speaking quickly in Italian. I caught words I didn't understand, just the cadence, rough and commanding. Then he looked back at me. "They'll come for you now," he said simply. "They think you're with me." My stomach dropped. "What? Why, I don't even know you." "You do now," he said. And that small, almost imperceptible smile returned, the one that made my skin crawl and my pulse race all at once. Before I could protest, he grabbed my wrist again, not roughly, but firmly enough that I couldn't pull away. "You have two choices, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and calm, the kind of calm that meant danger. "You stay here and they find you, or you come with me, and maybe you live to regret it." I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to do something, but his eyes held me still. There was something in them. Something that wasn't cruelty exactly, but something just as terrifying. Inevitability. Like he already knew what I'd choose. I didn't know why I nodded. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the strange, magnetic pull of him, the way danger wrapped around him like an aura. Or maybe it was because deep down, even in that chaos, I understood something I couldn't yet admit. That whatever he was, whatever world he came from, I was already falling into it. He pulled me toward the door, and as we stepped into the night, the air cold against my skin, I realized something that made my heart pound for an entirely different reason. The cockroach was still scurrying across my kitchen floor, but the real monster was the man whose hand I couldn't seem to let go of. And when he turned to look at me under the flickering streetlight, his voice low and unreadable, he said the words that sealed my fate. "You saw too much, Aria Vance. Now you don't get to leave." When I woke, the first thing I noticed wasn't the softness of the sheets, or the heavy scent of smoke and sandalwood that clung to the air, but the quiet. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, too deliberate, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My body felt heavy, my head thick with the dull ache of confusion, and it took me a long, trembling moment to realize that I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The cracked walls, the broken window, the sound of distant sirens that usually sang through my sleepless nights. All gone. Instead, I was surrounded by luxury so suffocatingly perfect that it almost felt wrong. The bed beneath me was enormous, draped in sheets the color of cream, smooth as silk beneath my fingers. A chandelier hung above, not one of those delicate crystal things you see in antique stores, but something dark, elegant, commanding, like everything else that surrounded me. The walls were a deep gray, the kind that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, and the floor was polished wood, gleaming even in the dim light of morning that filtered through sheer curtains. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a kingdom, one ruled by someone who didn't believe in softness. I sat up too quickly, and the room tilted slightly, forcing me to grab the edge of the mattress. My clothes were gone, not entirely, but I was wearing something different, something not mine. A simple white shirt, too big, hanging off one shoulder. Panic flooded me, fast and hot. The door opened. He walked in like he owned the air I breathed. Luciano Moretti, the name I didn't know yet, though I could already feel its weight. He wore black, head to toe, his jacket discarded somewhere, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by faint scars, veins visible beneath tanned skin. He carried a kind of danger that wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, patient, the kind that waited for you to realize just how powerless you were. "Good," he said, his voice low and measured. "You're awake." I wanted to throw something at him. A pillow, a curse, my entire confusion. But all I managed was a shaky whisper. "Where am I?" "My house," he replied simply, as if that explained anything. He crossed the room, each step deliberate, and poured something into a glass. Water, maybe, or poison. With him, I couldn't tell. He handed it to me, and when I didn't move, he arched an eyebrow. "You should drink. You were out most of the night." I took it because refusing felt like testing fate. The water was cool against my lips, grounding in a way I didn't expect. "What did you do to me?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, his tone maddeningly calm. "You fainted. I didn't have time to wait for you to wake up, so I brought you here." "You—" I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. "You kidnapped me." He tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was assessing a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or destroy. "If I wanted to kidnap you, you wouldn't have woken up in silk sheets, Bella. You'd be in a box." The casual cruelty of the statement made me shiver. "Why am I here?" I pressed, forcing myself not to look away. He hesitated, and for the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Something that almost looked like thought, or maybe restraint. "Because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time," he said again, softer this time, like he was tired of repeating it. "And because you saw me." "I didn't see anything," I lied quickly. "I don't even know who you are." He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant one. "You're lying, and I don't like liars." He turned and walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain just enough for light to spill across his profile. His features looked carved, sharp, almost unreal in the morning glow, the kind of beauty that doesn't comfort but intimidates, the kind that feels dangerous because it's so precise. "You shouldn't have been there, Aria Vance," he said, and hearing my name in his mouth sent a chill down my spine. "They thought you were with me. Now they'll come for you too." "Who will?" I whispered. He turned back to face me, his eyes dark as oil. "People who don't forgive. People who don't miss." I felt my stomach twist. "Then why didn't you let them have me? If they're so dangerous, why drag me into this?" "Because," he said simply, walking toward me again, "I don't like when innocent people get killed because of me." "Innocent?" I laughed weakly, the sound bitter. You don't even know me." He leaned down, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. "I don't need to know you to see what you are." The words hit me harder than they should have. I wanted to move, to pull away, but I couldn't. Something about his presence pinned me in place. The smell of him, the steadiness of his gaze, the strange, magnetic pull that made me forget how to be afraid properly. "Do you have any family?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "Family. Someone who'll miss you." I hesitated, then shook my head. "No one that would come looking." "Good," he said, straightening. "That makes this easier." My breath caught. "Makes what easier?" "You're staying here until I decide it's safe," he said, his tone flat, final, as if it were a fact carved in stone. "No." The word burst out of me before I could stop it. "No, you can't keep me here like some—" "I can," he interrupted, his voice low, calm again. "And I will." I stared at him, every part of me trembling with anger and disbelief. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said, that same ghost of a smile returning. "But you'll thank me when you're not full of bullet holes." The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to demand that he let me go, but deep down, beneath the panic, a small, traitorous part of me knew he was right. Whoever those men were, they weren't finished, and I'd already seen enough to become a target. I stood, my bare feet cold against the polished floor. "You could have just told the truth. You could have explained instead of dragging me here." "I don't explain," he said. "I act. That's how you survive in my world." "Your world?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What are you exactly?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the scar that traced his cheekbone, the small fleck of gold hidden in the dark of his iris. "I'm the man people call when they want to make a problem disappear," he said quietly. "And you, Arya, are a problem I can't make disappear." I should have felt terrified. Maybe I did. But there was something else beneath the fear. Something I couldn't name. He was dangerous, yes. But he was also magnetic in a way that made my heart betray me with every beat. "You can't keep me here," I said again, even though we both knew it was useless. He looked down at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then said, "You'll stay until it's over. After that you can go, that's the deal." "What deal?" I asked. He smiled, a small, dangerous curve of his mouth. "The one where you keep breathing." I didn't see him again for the rest of the day. The house, no, the mansion, was large enough to get lost in, a maze of long corridors and rooms that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. There were men stationed in the hallways, all dressed in black, their eyes sharp but empty. The kind of men who'd been taught not to ask questions. As night fell, I found myself standing on the balcony outside my room, the city lights stretching endlessly below. The air was cold, the kind that bites your skin and makes you feel alive, even when you wish you weren't. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a low hum. Engines, maybe, or danger waiting to arrive. And when I turned back toward the room, I saw him standing there again, watching me through the glass, a shadow framed by dim light, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "You're thinking about running," he said. My heart stuttered. "Maybe." "If you do," he said softly, "they'll find you before I do." He took a slow drag, exhaling smoke like a sigh. "But if you stay," he added, his gaze locking on mine, "you might live long enough to hate me properly." And then he smiled, that dark, knowing smile that made something inside me twist painfully, and walked away, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the terrifying truth that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Maybe I was afraid of what he was starting to make me feel. It's strange how quickly the mind begins to normalize the things it should fear. By the third day in that house, I had stopped flinching at the sound of footsteps outside my door, stopped jumping every time I caught the glint of a gun tucked under the jacket of one of Luciano's men. The fear was still there, yes, but it had changed its shape. No longer sharp and immediate, but slow and constant, like the hum of electricity running through the walls. It was the kind of fear that didn't scream anymore. It whispered. It waited. It watched. I hadn't seen him since that night on the balcony. Not properly, anyway. I'd catch glimpses, his silhouette crossing the marble foyer, his voice low and commanding from another room, the soft echo of his shoes on polished floors. Each time, something inside me reacted like I was being pulled toward him by some invisible thread, something irrational, magnetic, and entirely outside my control. I told myself it was just adrenaline, a lingering side effect of the danger he had dragged me into, but deep down, I already knew that wasn't the truth. On the fourth night, when the knock came at my door, I was sitting by the window, staring at the distant lights of the city that I wasn't allowed to return to. The knock was firm, steady, not the kind that asked for permission, but the kind that simply announced its presence because it didn't need consent. "Come in," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. A man stepped inside, dressed in black like all the others, but older, his hair streaked with gray, his posture sharp. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Mr. Moretti requests your presence at dinner." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation either. It was a command disguised as civility. I almost refused, just to prove that I could. But something in his tone, something that carried the same stillness as a loaded gun, made me stand. He handed me a box, black and unmarked. Inside was a dress, deep wine red, soft and heavy against my fingers. I looked up at him, searching for an explanation, but he was already turning away. "Be ready in 20 minutes, he said, and then he was gone. The dress fit too perfectly for coincidence, hugging the shape of my body like it had been measured and made for me, which made me wonder, how long had Luciano known I'd be here? How much of this had been planned before that night in my kitchen? I didn't have answers, only the uneasy feeling that I was walking straight into the center of something I didn't yet understand. When I entered the dining room, the first thing I noticed wasn't the table or the food, it was him. Luciano sat at the far end, in a high-backed chair of dark wood, his posture relaxed yet commanding, one hand resting lightly on a crystal glass filled with deep red wine. The light above him was dim, golden, catching on the edge of his jaw and the faint stubble that shadowed it. His eyes lifted the moment I stepped inside, and even from across the room, I felt the weight of that gaze settle over me like a hand against my throat. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, and in that silence, my pulse betrayed me, racing faster with every second that passed. When he finally did speak, his voice was low, almost intimate, like the room was listening and he wanted it to hear. "Sit," he said, motioning to the seat at his right. The table was long, covered in white linen, silver gleaming, candles flickering like nervous hearts. I moved toward the chair, feeling his gaze follow the entire way, and when I sat, he poured wine into my glass himself. The gesture should have been polite, maybe even romantic. But with him, everything felt like a calculated move on a chessboard I hadn't agreed to play. "You look better in color," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "I didn't exactly get to choose," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on me. "You could have refused. Would it have mattered?" He tilted his head slightly, considering. "Probably not." I wanted to hate the way he spoke. So calm, so sure. But there was something hypnotic about it. The way his words rolled like smoke. Deliberate and slow. The food came then, served by silent men who disappeared just as quickly. And for a while, neither of us said anything. The meal was exquisite, but I couldn't taste it. Every sense I had was focused on him, on the way he moved, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the glass when he thought, the faint scar that caught the candlelight when he turned his head. At one point, I caught him looking at me, not the way men usually look at women, not with lust or curiosity, but with a kind of study, as if he was trying to memorize something he couldn't quite name. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" I asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. He didn't look away. "You remind me of someone. Someone you knew." He paused, eyes lowering to the glass in his hand. "Someone I lost." There was a sadness in the way he said it, the kind that slips out before pride can stop it. I wanted to ask more, but something in his expression warned me not to. Instead, I said softly, "I'm sorry." He glanced up, a flicker of surprise passing through his eyes before he hid it behind that cold exterior again. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But his voice betrayed him. It wasn't long enough ago for him to forget. For a while, we ate in silence again, though the tension between us was heavier now, not the suffocating kind of fear I'd felt before, but something thicker, charged, like the space between lightning and thunder. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my skin prickled when his gaze lingered too long. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What happens when it's safe?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "Then you go." "And until then?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. "Until then, you learn the rules." "What rules?" He smiled slightly. "Rule 1, don't lie to me. Rule 2, don't go near the west wing of the house. Rule 3. He paused, his gaze locking on mine, voice dropping lower. "Don't mistake my kindness for weakness." I swallowed hard, unable to look away. "And if I break the rules?" He leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on the table, his voice a quiet threat. "Then I decide what happens to you." The air between us crackled, too heavy with words unspoken and meanings neither of us dared to name. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The control he exuded wasn't loud, it was absolute. And I hated how much it affected me, how my breath caught and my body betrayed the fear my pride refused to show. When the dinner finally ended, he stood, rounding the table until he stood behind me. I felt him before I saw him, the heat of his presence, the faint brush of his fingers as he reached past me to take my untouched glass. His voice came close, almost a whisper against my ear. "Good girl," he said, not unkindly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew he had the upper hand. "You're learning." And then he walked away, leaving me sitting there, heart pounding. A single, terrifying realization blooming in the space he'd left behind. I wasn't just afraid of him anymore. I was fascinated. And fascination, in his world, felt a lot like falling. By the end of that week, the mansion had begun to feel like a cage disguised as a cathedral, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Its silence a kind of velvet prison that softened the edges of my fear without ever letting me forget that I was trapped inside. The days passed in fragments. The echo of distant voices behind closed doors. The low murmur of men who stopped talking the moment I appeared. The sound of footsteps that belonged to people who would never tell me their names. Every corridor smelled faintly of smoke and old wood and the faintest trace of him. That dark, intoxicating scent that clung to the walls like a memory I couldn't shake. I told myself I was searching for a way out, but the truth was that I was searching for him. I hated that admission even in the privacy of my mind. But every time I caught the tail end of his voice down the hall, every time I passed his study door and saw the flicker of light beneath it, something inside me twisted with a hunger I didn't want to name. The nights were the worst. The house seemed to breathe then, the shadows stretching longer, whispering my name in the rustle of the curtains. Sleep came in pieces, never whole, always interrupted by the same dream. His hand on my wrist, his voice low in my ear telling me to trust him even as the world burned around us. On the 5th night, I wandered farther than I ever had before, my bare feet silent against the marble floor. I should have stayed in my room. The rules had been clear. Don't go near the west wing. But curiosity is a kind of defiance, and fear, when stretched long enough, starts to look like courage. I followed the faint sound of a piano, soft and deliberate, the melody fragile as glass, and it led me to a door half open, light spilling out in a narrow ribbon across the dark hall. Inside, Luciano sat at the piano, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his head bent, the cigarette between his fingers burning low. The sight of him like that, unarmored, almost human, made me pause. The music stopped the moment he looked up. His eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat. We were both perfectly still, as if the air between us had turned solid. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, though there was no real anger in it, only weariness. "I couldn't sleep," I answered, stepping inside before I could change my mind. "I heard the music." He leaned back, studying me, the faintest trace of amusement ghosting across his mouth. "And you thought walking into a forbidden wing was the solution?" "I thought it was better than counting the cracks in the ceiling," I said, and that almost smile deepened just slightly, as if the edges of his restraint were softening. He gestured to the seat beside the piano. "If you're going to break my rules, you might as well sit while you do it." I hesitated, then crossed the room. The music sheets on the stand were covered in notes that looked like they'd been rewritten 100 times, the ink smudged, the corners creased. "I didn't know you played," I said softly. "I don't," he replied. "Not anymore." The answer was too heavy for something so simple. "Why did you stop?" He looked at the keys, his expression distant. "Because everything I used to play for is gone." There it was again. That crack in his armor, small but undeniable. I wanted to ask more, but the question that came out was softer, almost accidental. "Who was she?" He didn't ask how I knew it was a she. He didn't need to. "Her name was Elena," he said after a long pause. "She was family." The word sounded wrong on his tongue, too tender for a man like him. "What happened to her?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling like a sigh. "What always happens when you love something in my world? Someone took her from me to teach me a lesson." I felt the air change then, thick with the kind of grief that never dulls but hardens. His hand flexed once against his thigh, a silent echo of violence long past. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Instead, I let the silence hold us, the only sound the faint crackle of the cigarette as it burned. When he looked at me again, there was something new in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or disbelief. "You have her eyes," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. The words hit me like a shock. "What?" He stood, closing the distance between us in slow, measured steps, until he was close enough that I could see the faint shadows of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "The first night I saw you," he murmured, "I thought I was seeing a ghost." I wanted to move, to deny whatever it was he saw when he looked at me, but his gaze held me still. And when his hand lifted, hovering near my face, the world seemed to narrow to that single gesture. He didn't touch me, not yet, but the air between us felt charged, fragile, as if one more breath might break it. "I'm not her," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said. But there was doubt tangled in the words, or maybe longing. "But you make me remember what it felt like before everything turned to blood." The confession hung there, heavy and intimate, and before I could respond, he turned away, pacing toward the window. The city glowed faintly below, distant and untouchable, and his reflection stared back at him like a stranger he didn't quite recognize. "I shouldn't have brought you here," he said, more to himself than to me. "Every time I look at you, I start to forget what I swore I'd never feel again." I could have walked away then, left him to his ghosts, but something in his voice rooted me to the floor. Maybe it was pity, maybe fascination, maybe the quiet ache of seeing someone who carried their ruin like a second skin. I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint tremor in his hands, the proof that beneath all that power there was still something painfully human. "Then don't look away," I said softly. "You don't have to forget." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he turned, and for the first time I saw the storm without the mask. The raw grief, the desire, the fury at himself for still being capable of either. His hand came up again, this time not hesitant, and when his fingers brushed my cheek it was like touching a live wire, the kind of contact that burns and soothes at once. He didn't kiss me. He didn't have to. The silence between us was enough, thick with everything we weren't saying, everything we were trying not to want. Then, as if the moment had frightened him, he pulled back, his expression closing like a door. "Go back to your room," he said, his voice steady again but colder. "And don't come here again." I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger, it was fear, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how much you stand to lose. So I turned and walked out, each step echoing against the marble like the toll of a clock counting down to something inevitable. When I reached the end of the corridor, I looked back once. The door was still open, the faint glow of the room spilling into the dark hall, and for just a second I saw him there, sitting at the piano again, fingers hovering over the keys but not playing, trapped between the past he couldn't forget, and the danger of the present he was creating with me. And that's when I understood the truth that made my chest ache. The West Wing wasn't forbidden because of what it contained. It was forbidden because of what it awakened. The days after that night in the West Wing passed in a haze of silence and things unsaid, the kind of silence that hums just beneath the surface of every conversation, making even the smallest gesture feel significant. I tried to avoid him. Truly I did. But the mansion itself seemed built to betray me. Every hallway led back to him. Every shadow seemed to carry the faint echo of his voice. Every breath of air tasted faintly like the smoke he left behind wherever he went. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the confinement, the boredom, the strange disorienting rhythm of being trapped in a world where nothing belonged to me, not even my time. But there were moments, fleeting, sharp, when I'd catch him watching me from across a room, and in those moments the air between us felt too thick to breathe, as if we were both caught in something inevitable. It was late one evening when everything shifted, when something fragile between us finally cracked. I had gone to the library to escape the stifling weight of my thoughts. A massive room with high ceilings and shelves that climbed so far upward they seemed to vanish into shadow. I'd come to love that room, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was the only place in the house that didn't feel entirely his. I was halfway through a book I wasn't reading when the door opened. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. His presence arrived before he did, a sudden stillness that made every part of me tighten in recognition. "You've been avoiding me," Luciano said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, but with that underlying weight that made everything he said sound like a command. I looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. "Maybe I've been busy." He stepped further inside, letting the door close behind him. "Busy doing what?" "Counting the cracks in the ceiling," I said, echoing my own words from that night in the West Wing. The faintest hint of a smile touched his mouth, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You have a sharp tongue, Arya. You should learn when to use it. And you should learn that people don't like being prisoners. I shot back, standing, the book falling closed with a soft thud. Or maybe you already know that and just don't care. His eyes darkened slightly, but his tone stayed calm, measured. You're not my prisoner. You're under my protection. Protection? I laughed, though it came out bitter. Is that what you call this? Being locked away like a secret you're too afraid to let the world see? For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or pain. But it was gone before I could name it. He took another step toward me, slow and deliberate, and I backed up until my shoulder hit the edge of the bookshelf. Do you really think I enjoy this? He said quietly. Keeping you here, watching you look at me like I'm the villain in your story. Aren't you? I whispered. His eyes found mine, and something in them shifted, softened. No, he said, but I've done enough to deserve the title. He was close now, too close, and I hated that even as fear trembled beneath my skin, something else, something reckless and traitorous, rose to meet it. My heart was beating too fast, my breath uneven, and the scent of him, smoke, leather, something darker, filled the small space between us until there was nowhere left for thought. Why are you really here? I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. He hesitated, the kind of hesitation that says more than any confession could. Because I can't stay away from you, he said finally, and the honesty in his tone made something inside me unravel. It should have been a warning. It was a warning. But instead it felt like gravity, pulling me forward even as every rational part of me screamed to stop. He reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch barely there, more a question than a gesture. You shouldn't look at me like that, he murmured. Like what? I asked. Like you want to believe I can still be saved. There was so much sorrow in his voice that it hurt to hear. And before I could think, before I could stop myself, I said softly, maybe I do. The moment stretched thin between us. One breath, two, and then it broke. His hand came to the side of my face, rough but gentle. And when he kissed me, it wasn't careful or calculated. It was desperate, hungry, full of everything we had both been trying not to feel. It wasn't soft. It was fire meeting water, chaos meeting restraint, a collision of two people who had no business touching, but couldn't help it. His mouth moved against mine like a promise and a warning, and for a moment I forgot who he was, forgot where I was, forgot everything except the taste of him and the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears. When he finally pulled away, I was breathless, trembling, every nerve in my body alive. He rested his forehead against mine, his voice low and rough. This shouldn't happen, he said. You don't understand what I am, Arya. You think you do, but you don't. Then tell me, I whispered. Tell me what you are. He didn't answer. Not right away. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, the tension radiating off him in waves. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder, distant again, as if he'd shut something inside himself back behind the steel doors where it belonged. Go back to your room, he said. Forget this happened. But I couldn't. I didn't. Later that night, when the house was quiet and sleep refused to come, I found myself standing outside his study door. Voices drifted through, his and another man's, low and urgent. I knew I shouldn't listen, but curiosity is a dangerous thing when paired with new desire. She looks just like her, the other man said, his tone wary. You think that's a coincidence? Luciano's voice came next, softer but sharper, the kind of tone meant to end a conversation. I told you before. She's not part of that world. Leave it alone. Does she know? A pause. No, Luciano said finally. and she never will. My heart went still. Whatever secret tied me to the ghost named Elena, whatever reason he had for keeping me here, it wasn't just about protection. It was about a lie, one that he was building between us like a wall he hoped I'd never see over. I backed away from the door, every step a careful betrayal of the trust I'd almost given him. The kiss still burned on my lips, but now it tasted different. Not like desire, but like danger. And as I slipped back to my room, the realization struck me with the weight of something I already knew but didn't want to admit. I was falling for a man who had already decided I could never know the truth. The next morning, the mansion felt colder. Not in temperature, but in spirit. As if the walls themselves had heard what I'd overheard and were now holding their breath along with me. I moved through the corridors like a ghost, aware of every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of fabric from the men posted at the doors. The air carried that metallic scent that always followed violence, though I hadn't yet seen any proof of it. I only knew instinctively that something in Luciano's world had shifted overnight, and that I was now inside its gravity, whether I liked it or not. Sleep had been impossible. The echo of his voice, "She never will," kept replaying in my head, looping through every heartbeat until the words felt carved into my skin. I told myself I wouldn't think about it, that I'd act normal, that I'd pretend I hadn't heard. But pretense has never been my strength. My face gives me away before my words do. And when I found him that morning in the marble hall, speaking with two men in Italian, he saw it immediately. The conversation stopped the moment I appeared. The men left without looking at me, their shoulders stiff, their steps too quick. And Luciano turned toward me with that measured calm that was somehow worse than anger. "You were near my study last night." It wasn't a question. I tried to meet his gaze, failed, looked at the floor instead. I couldn't sleep. He took a step closer, the distance between us shrinking like the air was folding in on itself. "That's not an answer." I swallowed, forcing the words out before fear could steal them. "You were talking about me." He didn't deny it. He just watched me, waiting for the rest. "You said I reminded you of someone," I continued, the tremor in my voice betraying the calm I wanted to fake. "You said I wasn't part of that world, but you're lying, aren't you? I am part of it somehow." Luciano's jaw tightened, the faint pulse in his temple flickering like a warning light. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me," I said, louder this time, the sharp edge of anger slicing through the fear. "Tell me why you brought me here. Tell me who she was." For a moment I thought he would. His eyes softened, and his mouth opened slightly as if the truth was right there, balanced on the tip of his tongue. But then something changed. He looked past me toward the window, where the reflection of movement flashed, black cars approaching through the gates. "Inside," he said, his tone abruptly all command again. "Now." "What?" He grabbed my wrist, pulling me behind him toward a side corridor. "They're early." "Who's early?" "The people who want you dead." The world blurred. One moment we were in the hall, the next we were descending narrow stairs into the lower part of the house. A concrete corridor lit by bare bulbs, the air damp and metallic. My pulse roared in my ears as he led me into a small room and pushed a panel in the wall that I hadn't noticed before. Behind it was a reinforced door. "Stay here," he ordered. "No." The refusal left me before I could think. "You can't just lock me away again." His hand came up, not in anger but in restraint, hovering near my shoulder. "If they see you, they'll use you against me. Do you understand?" I stared up at him, breath coming fast, the fear too tangled with the furious need to know the truth. "Then stop lying to me. Tell me why they want me." He hesitated, half a heartbeat, and then the walls shook. Gunfire above us, sharp and distant, but close enough to rattle the light fixture overhead. Luciano's eyes hardened into something lethal. "Because of your father," he said, almost spitting the word like it hurt. "Because he once stood beside the men trying to kill me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father's dead. Yes, he said quietly. Because of them. Because of what he did. And now they think you're leverage. Another crack of gunfire, louder this time, closer. Luciano pushed the door panel shut, sealing me in, his voice steady but low enough that I had to strain to hear it. You stay here until I come back. No arguments. If I don't you dare finish that sentence. He gave a faint, crooked smile, the kind that looked more like a confession than comfort. Then pray you never have to find out. The door closed and darkness swallowed me. It couldn't have been more than minutes, though it felt like hours, the muffled thunder of fighting above, boots against tile, glass breaking, the low barks of orders in Italian. I pressed my palms to my ears, willing it all to stop. But then silence fell. Thick and sudden. And silence is always worse because it means something has ended. When the door finally opened, the corridor smelled of smoke. Luciano stood there, his shirt streaked with blood. Some his, most not. His hair clung damp to his forehead, his expression unreadable but alive. Relief hit me so hard it felt like pain. It's over, he said, voice hoarse. I stepped toward him before I could stop myself. You're hurt. He glanced down at the cut on his arm, shrugged as if it were nothing. It's a scratch. I wanted to believe him, but the tremor in his hand told another story. I reached for him anyway, fingers brushing the fabric near the wound. He flinched, not from pain, but from the contact, as though touch itself was something foreign to him. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. About my father. His eyes found mine, and for once there was no power in them, only exhaustion. Because I didn't want you to see me the way he did. Because I didn't want to watch another person I care about drown in this life. The words stunned me. Care about. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It cracked something open inside me. Something I'd been holding shut ever since the night he first dragged me from my apartment. You think it's that simple? I asked, my voice shaking. That you can decide what I do, what I know, what I feel? He smiled faintly, but there was no victory in it. You're learning, Arya. In my world, control is the only kind of mercy left. He started to walk past me, toward the stairway, but I caught his sleeve. You said it's over. Is it? His pause was long enough to tell me the truth before he spoke it. No, he said. This was only a message. That night the mansion was quieter than ever, but the peace felt false, brittle. A calm stretched thin over something waiting to break. Luciano disappeared for hours, and when he returned, his hands were stained again, not with blood this time, but with ink, maps, lists, orders. His eyes were darker, the lines around them deeper. I watched from the doorway, unseen as he spoke to his men about revenge, about territory, about debts that could only be paid in pain. And yet beneath the violence I could hear it. The edge of desperation. The undertone of fear not for himself, but for me. Later, when the house had emptied and the city outside had fallen into the quiet rhythm of distant sirens, I found him alone in his study. He didn't look up when I entered. You should be asleep, he said. So should you. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. There's work to do. Because of me. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me, tired and unguarded. Because of us. The word hung there between us, fragile and dangerous. I wanted to tell him that I hated this world, that I hated the blood on his hands, that I hated how my heart still raced whenever he looked at me. But what I said instead was the truth I couldn't swallow any longer. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I said. He studied me for a long time, then nodded once, slowly. Good, he said. because from now on, fear won't save you." And with that, he turned back to the maps, already planning the next move in a war I hadn't chosen, but could no longer escape. As I left the study, one thought pulsed through me with every step. Whatever blood ran through his world was now on my hands too. Morning came gray and brittle, the kind of light that feels thin, as though the sun itself is reluctant to touch a house steeped in too much darkness. I woke to the echo of distant voices, men moving quickly, orders traded in low Italian bursts that carried urgency but no panic. That should have calmed me, yet something in the rhythm of it all felt wrong, like a melody I suddenly realized was being played in a different key. Luciano had left before dawn. I'd heard the door, the soft click of his boots against the stone, the brief rustle of his coat. He hadn't said where he was going, only that he would be back before noon and that I was not, under any circumstance, to leave my room. He'd smiled when he said it, the kind of smile meant to hide worry, and for the first time I'd wanted to ask him to stay. I didn't. And because I didn't, I was alone when the world broke open. It started with silence, the sudden, unnatural kind that precedes every disaster. The voices outside my door stopped. The air seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound of something heavy striking wood, a single muffled thud followed by another, and another. I stood, heart racing, reaching for the chair near the window just as the door burst inward. Two men in dark clothes filled the doorway, their faces half covered, movements sharp and practiced. They didn't speak. One of them grabbed my arm while the other pressed something over my mouth, a cloth that smelled sweet and chemical. I tried to fight, but the world tilted, colors bleeding into black. And when I woke, everything hurt. My wrists burned where the rope bit into them, my throat ached, and the air smelled of dust and iron. I was on the floor of what looked like a warehouse. High ceiling, beams thick with rust, one small window far above letting in a strip of cold light. I wasn't alone. A man sat on a crate a few feet away, smoking lazily, his gun resting across his knees. He was older, gray stubble shadowing a face that looked carved from rock. His eyes found mine with the disinterest of someone looking at an object, not a person. "Awake, little dove?" he asked, voice roughened by smoke and age. "You're prettier than the pictures." My voice came out hoarse. "Where is he?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Always about him. You people never learn. He can't save everyone, you know. Not this time." I pulled against the ropes until my wrists screamed. "You don't understand. I'm not—" He interrupted, leaning forward. "I understand enough. You're leverage, and he'll come for you because that's what he does. He comes, and people die." His certainty terrified me more than the gun. I turned away, closing my eyes, forcing my breath to slow. "He'll come," I told myself. "He'll find me." Time lost meaning. It could have been an hour or a day. The light didn't change. Only the ache in my body did. The man smoked, paced, muttered into a phone once. I caught fragments of words: money, shipment, revenge. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Luciano's war. This was personal. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. The man straightened, reaching for his weapon. But before he could lift it, the door exploded inward. The sound was deafening, metal against metal, the whine of bullets slicing air. I dropped to the floor, covering my head. Shouts in Italian overlapped, the sharp crack of gunfire answering gunfire, the acrid sting of smoke filling the room. Through the chaos, a voice cut clear, commanding, furious. Luciano's. "Down!" he barked, and I obeyed without thinking. Seconds later, it was over. The silence returned, heavy and trembling. When I dared to look up, the man on the crate was gone, lying still in a dark pool spreading across the floor. Luciano stood in the doorway, breathing hard, blood on his sleeve, eyes burning with something between rage and relief. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, kneeling to cut the ropes from my wrists. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I whispered, though the word felt small, untrue in ways I couldn't explain. His hands trembled as he worked the knife through the rope. "I told you not to leave the room." "I didn't," I said. "They came for me." He froze at that, eyes lifting to mine. Whatever fury he'd been holding on to melted into something else. Something raw. "Then it's my fault." He pulled me to my feet, steadied me when my knees gave out. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside the warehouse was still loud. Sirens somewhere distant, the thrum of engines. But here, between us, there was only the sound of breath. "You found me," I said quietly. He exhaled through his nose, half laughing, half breaking. "You think I'd let anyone keep you from me?" I wanted to thank him, to tell him that I'd never doubted, but the words caught in my throat. He looked at me like a man seeing the one thing he couldn't afford to lose, and that look terrified me more than any gun. Back at the mansion, the mood was different. The guards spoke in hushed voices, avoiding my gaze as if my return had confirmed something sacred or cursed. Luciano disappeared into his office with his men, slamming the door behind him. I should have rested, but rest felt impossible. My mind kept replaying the moment his hand touched mine in the warehouse. The heat of it. The tremor he couldn't hide. Beneath all his power and control, there was a desperation I'd never seen before, and knowing I'd caused it made my heart ache in ways I didn't understand. When night fell, I found him on the balcony outside his study, leaning on the railing, smoke curling from the cigarette between his fingers. The city lights glittered far below like a broken mirror. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without turning. "You always say that," I answered softly. "And yet here we are." He laughed under his breath, the sound dry. "You're not afraid anymore." "I'm tired of being afraid." He looked at me then, really looked, and in his eyes I saw exhaustion, anger, and something deeper, guilt. "They were my enemies," he said quietly, "but you paid the price." I stepped closer. "So stop making me a piece on your chessboard. Let me choose whether I stand beside you or not." He studied me for a long time, then nodded. Once. "Then you choose now." I didn't know what I was choosing exactly. Safety, danger, him. But I stepped forward anyway, until the space between us was gone. "Then I stay," I said. He inhaled sharply, as if the words were both gift and curse. "You don't know what that means." "Then teach me." His jaw clenched, eyes searching mine for hesitation, and finding none. The city wind pulled at his hair, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. For the first time since I'd met him, Luciano looked almost uncertain, as if I'd done something more dangerous than all his enemies combined, given him something to lose. Much later, after he'd gone back inside and the night had swallowed the mansion in silence again, I realized what the cage truly was. It wasn't the walls or the guards or the endless rules. The cage was the bond forming between us, built from fear, forged in rescue, sealed by gratitude and something dangerously close to love. And as I stood alone beneath the indifferent stars, one truth settled cold and clear in my chest. He could free me whenever he wanted. But I wasn't sure I would ever want to leave. The night after my rescue felt endless. A blur of half-dreams and shadows that refused to leave even when I opened my eyes. I woke again and again to the sound of thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Just memory echoing in the corners of my mind. The rattle of gunfire. The crash of boots against concrete. the sound of my name torn out of Luciano's throat as if it were the last word he'd ever speak. Every time I tried to sleep, I saw his face in that warehouse light, blood, smoke, and something like desperation in his eyes, and I wondered which of us had really been the one in the cage. By morning, the house was too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, only the muted ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. The silence pressed against me until I couldn't bear it anymore, so I slipped out of my room and followed the scent of coffee that drifted faintly from the kitchen. One of the guards nodded when he saw me but said nothing. Their silence had become a language of its own, one that told me I was safe only because he had decided I was. Luciano wasn't there. His absence filled the air like smoke. I ate nothing, wandered until the corridors began to feel unfamiliar again, and somehow ended up outside the door of his study. For a long time I just stood there, listening. Nothing. Then, without letting myself think, I knocked once and entered. He was sitting behind the desk, the light from the tall window cutting across his face in sharp lines. The world outside was gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Papers were scattered across the desk, a map spread open, a half-empty glass of whiskey near his hand. He looked up when I came in, and though his expression barely changed, something in his eyes softened in that imperceptible way I'd begun to recognize. "You should still be resting," he said. "I'm tired of resting," I replied, closing the door behind me. "I'm tired of pretending that everything's fine." He leaned back slowly, studying me as if deciding whether to argue or listen. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm angry," I said. "Maybe that looks the same." A long silence stretched between us. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Say what you came to say." I stepped closer to the desk, the distance between us shrinking with every word. "You keep saving me, locking me away, keeping me in the dark. I want to know why. I want to know the truth about my father, about Elena, about why I'm here at all." His jaw tightened. "You already know more than is safe." "I almost died because of your secrets," I said, my voice rising. "So don't tell me about safety." He stood then, the chair scraping back, his presence suddenly too large for the room. "You think the truth will make you feel better? It won't. It will ruin what little peace you have left." "Then ruin it," I whispered. For a moment he didn't move. Then he walked to the window, staring out at the rain that had begun to fall, each drop tapping softly against the glass. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, stripped of its usual command. "Your father worked for them once, the Caruso family. He was clever, loyal, but he made a mistake. He tried to leave, to take something that wasn't his. Money, information. I warned him that no one leaves clean." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You knew him?" "I did," he said. "And when he disappeared, I thought it was over. But then I saw you and I realized they hadn't forgiven anything. You're the reminder they wanted to send me. The daughter of a man who betrayed them and a mirror of the woman I lost." "Elena," I said softly. He nodded once. "She was my wife." The words landed heavy and slow, sinking deep. I'd guessed it, but hearing him say it made the air colder somehow. "They killed her," I said, though it wasn't a question. He turned from the window, eyes dark. "Because of me. Because she loved me enough to stand in front of a bullet that wasn't meant for her." I didn't know what to say. Grief had carved him hollow long before I'd met him, but now I could see the shape of it. The reason behind the coldness, the rules, the cruelty that wasn't cruelty so much as armor. "I remind you of her," I said quietly. "Yes," he admitted, "and no. You're not her, Aria. But sometimes, when you look at me, I forget that difference, and that's what terrifies me." He walked past me to the sideboard, poured another glass of whiskey, his hand steady despite the confession. You were never supposed to be part of this. I should have let them take you that first night." "But you didn't," I said. "Why?" He looked at me then, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Because I couldn't." It was such a simple answer, but it held everything he wasn't saying. I stepped toward him, slowly, until my hand brushed the glass he held. "You keep saying I'm safer here," I said. "But what if that's just what you tell yourself so you don't have to admit you need me?" For a heartbeat, silence. Then his fingers loosened. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. He didn't look at it. His gaze stayed locked on mine, the storm in his eyes no longer restrained. "You think I need you?" he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Yes," I said, even though the word trembled. "The same way I think I need you, and I hate that I do." He exhaled, long and uneven, as though I'd just spoken the thing he'd been trying not to name. He reached up, brushing his thumb against the scar on his cheek, a gesture half absent, half confession. "You don't know what that means, Arya. To need someone in my world is to give them a weapon." "Then maybe I already have one," I said. For the first time, he laughed, not the cruel, mocking sound I'd heard before, but something quieter, broken at the edges. "You have no idea how dangerous that makes you." The tension in the room coiled tighter until it became a single thread stretched between us. I wanted to step back, to breathe, but I couldn't. He was still looking at me, and for the first time, the darkness in his eyes didn't scare me. It felt like recognition. He moved first, closing the space until I could feel the warmth of him, the weight of everything unspoken pressing between us. His hand lifted, hesitated, then touched the side of my face. It wasn't possessive or desperate this time. It was gentle, careful, the touch of a man who knew he could destroy everything he loved simply by holding it too tightly. "I shouldn't," he murmured. "I know," I whispered. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The closeness itself felt like confession, every breath shared an admission neither of us could take back. When he finally stepped away, the world seemed smaller somehow, the silence louder. "I'll protect you," he said quietly, "even if I have to protect you from myself." "And if I don't want that?" I asked. He met my eyes, and for once there was no command, only honesty. "Then you'll be the one thing in this house I can't control." That night, I lay awake listening to the rain, replaying his words. Somewhere deep down, I understood that the line between protector and captor, between love and obsession, had already blurred beyond repair. Yet I also knew that what bound us now wasn't fear. It was recognition. Two broken halves drawn together by the same darkness. And though I didn't want to admit it, part of me knew what was coming next. In his world, love was never enough to save you. It only marked where to aim when the war began. The days after that confession blurred into one another. Thin threads of light and shadow woven through the same quiet corridors that now felt different, less like a cage, and more like the fragile peace before a storm. I told myself I could leave if I wanted, that the door to my room wasn't locked anymore, that the guards looked at me with something closer to respect than suspicion. But freedom, I was beginning to understand, is not a door left open. It's the courage to walk through it. And I didn't have that courage anymore. Not when the air itself carried his presence. Not when every corner of the house still echoed with the memory of his voice whispering promises I didn't trust but needed all the same. Luciano had changed too. He moved through the mansion differently, slower, heavier, as if every step cost him a piece of control. The mask he wore in front of his men, that smooth, unbreakable calm, cracked more often now. I'd catch glimpses of something raw underneath it, something dangerously close to tenderness, and I didn't know whether to run from it or toward it. At night I heard him pacing in his study, the sound of glass breaking once, the muffled curse that followed. Whatever war had been brewing outside these walls was closing in. It began quietly. A message delivered by one of his men. A few clipped Italian words that made Luciano's jaw tighten. After that, tension spread through the house like fire beneath floorboards. Extra guards at the gates, phones ringing in the middle of the night, whispered meetings behind closed doors. I tried not to listen, but curiosity is a hunger that grows sharper with denial. And one evening, I found myself outside his office again. Through the half-open door, I saw him standing over a map, hands braced against the desk, his face a study in exhaustion. Another man stood across from him, younger, nervous. "They know where she is," the man said. Luciano's head lifted slowly. "How?" "There's a leak. Someone inside." For a long moment he said nothing, then reached for the gun resting on the edge of the desk. The metallic click that followed made my stomach turn. "Find him," he said, "and make it clean." The other man nodded and left quickly. Luciano stayed where he was, staring down at the map as though it might answer the question none of us could voice. How much more could he lose before everything collapsed? I should have walked away, but I couldn't. When he finally noticed me, there was no anger in his eyes, only a weary resignation. "You shouldn't hear these things," he said. "I already do," I replied. "Every wall in this house has ears." He almost smiled at that, but it didn't last. "If they come here," he said softly, "I want you to run. Promise me. I'm tired of running. This isn't about pride, Arya. It's survival." "And what about you?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "If they touch you, I burn the world." The simplicity of the threat chilled me more than the words themselves, because I believed him. And because part of me wanted to see what that kind of devotion looked like when the world finally burned. It happened 3 nights later. The storm outside had been gathering all evening, wind tearing at the shutters, thunder rolling across the hills like distant artillery. I couldn't sleep. Somewhere below, I heard engines, several, not the usual rhythm of the patrol cars. I went to the window, heart hammering. Headlights were cutting through the rain, too many of them, too fast. The alarms began a second later, short, sharp bursts followed by shouting. I grabbed my coat and ran into the corridor just as the first explosion rocked the east side of the house. The blast threw me against the wall. Heat and smoke filled the air. Someone yelled my name, and then Luciano was there, pulling me upright, half dragging, half shielding me as debris rained from the ceiling. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice hoarse over the noise. I obeyed because there was nothing else to do. The hallway ahead was chaos, men firing down the stairs, flashes of muzzle light illuminating faces twisted with fear. Luciano returned fire, his movements fluid, terrifyingly precise. I had never seen him like that, stripped of restraint, all fury and focus. It was beautiful and horrifying at once. He pushed me through a side door into a narrow stairwell. "Go." "No." "Arya, go." Another explosion answered him from below. The steps shook, smoke poured upward. I coughed, choking on the taste of gunpowder and rain. He caught my face in his hands for one brief, desperate moment. "If anything happens—" "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare make this sound like goodbye." Something flickered in his eyes, a flash of helplessness so rare I almost didn't believe it. Then he turned, gun raised, and disappeared back into the smoke. I don't remember how long I ran, through corridors that no longer looked like corridors, through rooms half collapsed, past bodies I didn't dare to see clearly. The noise was endless, gunfire and thunder blending into one furious heartbeat. I found an exit near the kitchens, burst into the rain, and stumbled toward the trees beyond the courtyard. For a moment, the cold air felt like freedom. Then a shout behind me shattered it. 2 men were running from the main gate, weapons drawn. I froze. Too slow. Too exposed. One of them raised his gun, but before he could fire, another shot cracked from somewhere above. He dropped instantly. The other turned, and Luciano stepped out from the shadows near the burning wreck of a car, his face streaked with soot, his shirt torn and blood-spattered. He moved fast, too fast for the remaining man to aim. A single shot, then silence again except for the rain. He turned toward me, chest heaving. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, too breathless to speak. "Stay behind me," he said again, and this time his voice broke. We made it as far as the gates before the final ambush. 3 more men emerged from the trees, one of them the gray-haired soldier I remembered from the warehouse, somehow still alive, grinning through blood-streaked teeth. "Thought you could keep her forever, Moretti?" he shouted over the storm. "You always did have a weakness for ghosts." Luciano fired first. The reply came instantly. 3 flashes, 1 deafening echo, and then everything slowed. I saw him stumble, the world tilting as he fell back against the gate, crimson blooming across his side. I screamed, ran to him, pressed my hands against the wound, useless against the flood of warmth beneath them. He caught my wrist, his grip iron even as his strength bled away. "Don't cry," he said, voice faint but steady. "Not for me." "Stay with me," I begged. "Please, Luciano, stay." His eyes found mine through the rain, softer now, unfocused. "I told you once I'd protect you," he whispered. "Even from myself. I guess this counts." And then his hand slipped. I don't remember how the shooting stopped or who pulled me away. I only remember the sound of his name in my throat and the sight of his body crumpled against the iron gate, the rain washing crimson across the stones like the world itself was trying to erase him. Later, when the sirens came and the mansion burned behind us, I sat in the back of a car that didn't belong to him, wrapped in a coat that still smelled of his cologne. Someone was speaking beside me, questions, orders, promises, but I heard none of it. I stared at the fire and thought of his last words, of the way he'd looked at me as if I were both salvation and punishment. I wanted to believe he was still alive, that somehow he'd find a way back like he always did. But the truth settled heavy and cold in my chest. Luciano Moretti had fallen, and I didn't know who I was without him. Morning came as a pale, reluctant thing, the sky the color of ash, the air thick with the scent of rain and smoke. The fire at the mansion had burned itself down to a skeletal ruin by dawn, leaving only the blackened ribs of walls and the slow rise of steam where the rain met what was left of heat. They said it was over, that the men who'd come for him were dead, that the war between families had collapsed under its own blood. But nothing felt finished. Wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when the silence begins, when you're left alone with what you've lost and what you can't undo. I stood at the edge of the ruins with a blanket around my shoulders, the world gray and infinite behind me, and tried to remember how to breathe. The police had come and gone. Luciano's men had scattered like ghosts, some vanishing into the city, others into the earth. They'd taken the bodies away before the sun rose, but I knew exactly where he had fallen. The stones there were still dark, slick with the rain that refused to wash anything clean. Someone had told me to rest, to eat, to go somewhere safe. But safety was a word that had lost its meaning. Everything in my world had been drawn around one center, and now that center was gone. The silence he left behind was louder than any gunfire. For 2 days I stayed near what was left of the house, sleeping in a guest room that hadn't burned, drinking the bitter coffee the guards brought, listening for footsteps that never came. Every time the wind shifted, I swore I could still hear him. The rhythm of his boots, the low timbre of his voice, the half-whispered aria that had always sounded more like a prayer than a name. On the third morning, a car arrived. Matteo, one of the few men who had stayed, came to find me. His face looked older than it had a week ago. "You should come," he said softly. "There's something you need to see." We drove north, past the city, up into the hills where the fog hung low. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't have the strength for curiosity. When we stopped, it was in front of a small stone chapel hidden among the cypresses. The door was open. Inside, candles burned in a soft golden line, their flames steady despite the draft that whispered through the nave. At the far end, beneath the stained glass window, stood a simple wooden coffin. No guards, no crowd, no priest. Just Matteo, 2 men I didn't know, and me. "He wanted it quiet," Matteo said. "No names, no headstone, just this." I walked forward, each step echoing against the stone floor. My hands trembled when I touched the lid, the wood cool beneath my fingers. I didn't cry. The tears had burned themselves out days ago, leaving only this hollow ache that felt endless. Matteo set a small envelope beside the coffin. "He left this for you," he said. "Told me to give it to you if things went wrong." When they left me alone, I opened it. His handwriting was rough, slanted, impatient even in ink. "Aria, if you're reading this, it means the world has finally collected its debt. Don't waste your breath on guilt. What happened to me was always going to happen. What matters is that you live, really live, not in fear, not in the shadow of my sins. You once asked me why I saved you. I didn't know then, not fully. Now I do. You reminded me of the part of myself I'd buried with her. You made me remember that even in a life built on blood, something pure can still exist, if only for a moment. That moment was you. Leave this city. Take the account number Matteo gives you. It's yours now. Start again somewhere the name Moretti means nothing. And if someday you find peace, don't look back. Promise me that much. L." The paper blurred, not from tears but from the tremor in my hands. The letter wasn't long, but it said everything I'd wanted to hear and everything I didn't know how to bear. He hadn't asked for forgiveness. He'd asked for a promise, and somehow that felt heavier. I folded the note carefully, pressed it to my chest, and whispered the words I hadn't been able to say when he was alive. "I forgive you." The echo vanished into the stone vault above me, leaving only the sound of rain against the roof. When I stepped outside, Matteo was waiting beside the car. "What will you do now?" he asked. I looked back at the chapel once, at the cypress trees bending in the wind, and felt something shift inside me, a loosening, quiet and painful. "I'll keep my promise," I said, "but not yet." Months passed. I left the city, crossed the sea, found work in a small coastal town where no one asked questions. I rented a room above a flower shop that smelled of salt and jasmine. Some mornings I woke forgetting where I was, half expecting to hear the click of his boots on the marble floor, the distant notes of a piano drifting through the hall. But memory, I learned, isn't a wound. It's a pulse. It fades and returns, softer each time, until one day you realize it's not pain anymore. It's proof you survived. One evening, close to spring, I went walking along the cliffs. The sky was turning violet, the sea restless beneath it. I carried his letter in my pocket, the edges worn from reading. The wind tugged at my hair, and for the first time in months I let myself smile. Not because I was happy, but because the ache had finally stopped feeling like an open wound. When I reached the overlook, I unfolded the letter one last time. The paper fluttered against my fingers, the ink fading where the rain had touched it that day. I read the last line aloud, "Promise me that much," and then let the wind take it. The paper rose, caught the air, and vanished into the horizon. I stood there until the sky turned dark, thinking about him. Not the violence, not the power, but the moments in between. His hand brushing my cheek in the half-light, his voice saying my name like it was the only thing left in the world worth saving. Love like that doesn't vanish. It becomes something quieter, something you carry inside you even when you've sworn to let it go. Now, when people ask about my past, I tell them only that I once loved a man who taught me the difference between safety and freedom. They don't need to know the rest. The truth belongs to me, and to the night, and to the man who became both my captor and my salvation. Sometimes, when the sea wind rises, I think I hear him again. A low whisper at my back, a voice that says my name and nothing more. And every time I answer the same way, quietly, to the wind, to the dark, to him. I kept my promise.